Did you know that some of Hollywood's most beloved stars, like Cary Grant and Henry Fonda, were part of an industry that often relied on harmful racial stereotypes? From Cary Grant's roles in films with problematic portrayals of non-white characters to Henry Fonda's involvement in movies that reflected the racial biases of his time, here are 20 Golden Age Hollywood stars who were extremely racist off-camera. 1. John Wayne. One of the most famous actors of the 20th century was John Wayne, popularly known as the Duke. He was an imposing figure with a commanding voice and became the symbol of rugged masculinity in Hollywood. His classic Western films, such as The Searchers, and war films like The Green Berets, made him the embodiment of the all-American hero. His self-confidence, patriotism, and machismo personality made him popular with the audience. But behind the camera, John Wayne said things that showed another face of the actor. During a 1971 Playboy interview, Wayne made many statements that caused an outcry. He openly advocated white supremacy, saying he had no guilt over the Native Americans being mistreated and black people enslaved, because in his view, they were not yet able to lead themselves. These statements were not just throwaway lines, they were expressions of a mindset that was long entrenched in racial bigotry. The public image of Wayne suffered as the reality of the chasm between on-screen heroism and off-screen beliefs began to sink in. 2. Walt Disney. Walt Disney was a name one thought immediately of fairy tales, magical castles, and lovable characters such as Mickey Mouse. In his establishment of Disney Studios, Walt was an early animation leader in creating film entertainment enjoyed by generations for decades to come. Among those include the timeless Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and Cinderella. Another example is the Disneyland theme park as the happiest place on earth. However, we all know Disney is not just magic and smiles. Critics have long pointed out racist undertones in some of his films. For example, Dumbo has crows that are clear racial caricatures, and Song of the South romanticizes the post-Civil War South while downplaying the harsh realities of slavery. Even though these depictions were reflective of societal norms at the time, they perpetuated harmful stereotypes that still spark debates today. Besides the films, Disney was accused of racism in the workplace. Some former employees have said that he promoted an atmosphere where racist and anti-Semitic attitudes were not only tolerated, but sometimes encouraged. 3. Clark Gable. Clark Gable is usually remembered as the dashing, rugged star of Gone with the Wind and countless other classic films. With his iconic role as Rhett Butler, Gable became one of Hollywood's most celebrated leading men, known for his charismatic personality and his ability to portray tough yet vulnerable characters. He worked with the greatest directors and actors of his generation and thus secured himself as one of the great legends of Golden Age Hollywood. His career lasted over several decades. But even as Gable is credited as one of the greatest icons in film history, his legacy remains a lot more complicated with race. On one side, Gable is famous for rebuking the racial norms set on the film set of Gone with the Wind, a film that remains notorious for the slavery portrayals and its relation with the South. He notoriously refused to be convinced when the producers of the movie sought to engage an African-American actress who was meant to play a minor subservient role. He pushed for a black actress, Hattie McDaniel, for a role that would win her the first Oscar by an African-American. In this respect, Gable was one of the more progressive in Hollywood with his casting decisions. But despite his role in challenging some racial norms on set, Gable's actions and the roles he accepted throughout his career didn't always align with his public stance on race. Like many of his contemporaries, Gable worked in an industry that often relied on harmful racial stereotypes, and some of his films featured black characters in stereotypical and demeaning roles. Sometimes off-screen activities and decisions contradicted the image of the progressive leader he sought to portray. It is not forgotten that, although Gable could be a progressive figure in many ways, the Hollywood system of his time was still deeply entrenched in racism. As one of the greatest stars of his generation, Gable had to navigate such racial dynamics, sometimes making choices that reflected the racial biases of his time. 4. Shirley Temple. Shirley Temple was Hollywood's darling, a child star whose curly hair, bright smile, and tap-dancing shoes brought joy to millions during the Great Depression. Films like Bright Eyes and The Little Colonel showcased her immense talent and made her a household name. Temple's career was groundbreaking for a young girl, and her innocence on screen became a source of hope for audiences during hard times. Yet, Temple's movies often contained disturbing racial caricatures, a product of the times. One example was her relationships with Negro actors who were common in servile roles. Perhaps the most famous was what she did with Bill Bojangles Robinson, the first Negro professional tap dancer, in the movie The Little Colonel. Her scenes with Robinson captured the attention of audiences who praised their charm. 5. Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney was one of Hollywood's most versatile actors. He had that boy-next-door charm and endless energy, but from being a child star to a very successful adult career, Rooney was always on the scene. Movies like Babes in Arms and The Human Comedy gave him a place among the brightest stars of his time. Rooney was a master of comedy and so wholesome, with characters so relatable that people loved him. However, one performance marred his legacy. In the 1961 film Breakfast at Tiffany's, Rooney played Mr. Yunyoshi, a Japanese landlord. His portrayal is, in many ways, widely regarded as one of the most offensive racial caricatures in Hollywood. Wearing exaggerated prosthetics, buck teeth, and a heavily stereotypical accent, Rooney's presentation was a cruel mockery of Asian culture. This character may have been played for laughs at the time, but it incensed Asian Americans even then. Decades later, Mr. Yunyoshi is a jarring exemplar of Hollywood's insensitivity and exclusion. Rooney later apologized for the role, but that was too little. Too late. 6. Vivien Leigh. Vivien Leigh's name is synonymous with Gone with the Wind, where she delivered an unforgettable performance as Scarlett O'Hara. This role won her an Academy Award and cemented her place as one of Hollywood's most iconic actresses. Known for her grace and beauty, Leigh also dazzled audiences in A Streetcar Named Desire, which earned her another Oscar. Although Leigh's talent for acting was undeniable, her connection to Gone with the Wind was a controversial one. It is set against the American Civil War and Reconstruction. In the movie, this romanticized antebellum South, a time when slavery formed the bedrock of society in the South. Scarlett was strong and determined under Leigh, but the story told of a world based on racial inequality. Critics have pointed out that Leigh, like many of her contemporaries, adopted the idealistic view of the South presented in the film. Even though Scarlett was a reflection of the script and not necessarily Leigh's personal views, her connection to such narratives has opened up discussions about herself. The film itself, though a cinematic marvel, has been criticized for perpetuating harmful stereotypes and glossing over the realities of slavery. 7. Judy Garland. Judy Garland is remembered as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, which placed her in Hollywood lore forever. Her performance of Over the Rainbow was the epitome of hope, and her talent for both singing and acting made her an icon. Beyond The Wizard of Oz, she sparkled in Meet Me in St. Louis and A Star is Born, making a name for herself as one of the greatest performing actresses of her era. However, like many stars of her time, Garland participated in performances that are deeply offensive by today's standards. In the early 20th century, minstrel shows were a common affair and involved white performers using blackface to caricature African Americans. Garland was an actor who appeared in such acts during her career and included scenes in films that perpetrated racial stereotypes. 8. Bing Crosby. Bing Crosby is one of the most significant entertainers of the 20th century. He was the man who popularized smooth voice and relaxed style. He became famous for hits like White Christmas and his roles in films such as Going My Way and Holiday Inn. It is due to his charming and easygoing nature that he became a household name, and his contributions to music and cinema are still celebrated today. However, some of Crosby's performances fell into racial stereotypes, as would be representative of the stereotype-holding times of his life. Specifically, scenes in films like Holiday Inn featured moments that depicted black characters in subservient roles or relied on offensive tropes. While Crosby himself rarely came in for criticism during his lifetime, these portrayals reveal the problematic ways race was handled in Hollywood's golden age. 9. Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin is one of the most iconic figures in Hollywood history. Known for his timeless character, the Tramp, Chaplin's unique blend of comedy and heartfelt storytelling earned him a place in the hearts of audiences around the world. From silent films like City Lights and Modern Times to his later works such as The Great Dictator, Chaplin used his art to entertain, provoke thought, and even champion humanitarian causes. Yet, even while Chaplin was being acclaimed for the forward-thinking and strong progressive message behind works like The Great Dictator, in which he denounced fascism, some of his films perpetuated racist stereotypes that reflected the bigotry of the time. For instance, there were a few moments where Chaplin's humor involved gross caricatures of races or ethnicities. Though considered funny at the time, these depictions have since been recognized as hateful and demeaning to those to whom they were applied. It is interesting to note that Chaplin's work is often characterized by the struggle of the underdog, and he was vocal about social injustice. However, the odd reliance on racial tropes in his movies shows how even the well-meaning artists of their time were prone to the same biases as everyone else in their generation. 10. Fred Astaire. Fred Astaire is one of the most renowned performers of Hollywood's golden age. With unmatched talent as a dancer, singer, and actor, Fred Astaire embodied elegance on screen. Films such as Top Hat and Swing Time, with leading ladies like Ginger Rogers, set a new benchmark for musical cinema under his style. His effortless moves and smooth style made him a household name and symbolized Hollywood glamour. But even stars as idolized as Fred Astaire were not exempt from the troubling practices of their time. Astaire performed in blackface for some productions, a practice that was shockingly common in early Hollywood. Blackface referred to white performers darkening their skin to portray caricatured versions of black people, often perpetuating offensive stereotypes. In one of his most famous routines, Astaire paid tribute to Bill Bojangles Robinson, an iconic black tap dancer, by performing a number in blackface. While Astaire may have wanted to pay homage to Robinson, the vehicle he chose for that act was reflective of the heavily ingrained racism of the entertainment industry at the time. 11. Katharine Hepburn. Katharine Hepburn is often regarded as one of the greatest actresses Hollywood has ever seen. Her sharp wit, strong will, and commanding presence are some of the qualities she portrayed in films like The Philadelphia Story and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Her commitment to challenging traditional gender roles meant that her career spanned decades as a feminist icon. But even Hepburn's brilliant work comes with controversy. In 1944, she played the lead role in the film Dragon Seed, which was a film in which she played a Chinese woman while being a white actress. That was the then yellow face whereby non-Asian actors portrayed Asian characters, often donning exaggerated makeup and using stereotypical mannerisms. As such, the film was a reflection of an unfortunate phenomenon in early Hollywood where Asian actors were shunned from serious roles. What makes this more complicated is that Hepburn was progressive in many other aspects of her life and career, often advocating for equality and social change. Yet her participation in Dragon Seed highlights how even forward-thinking stars of the Golden Age could still be complicit in perpetuating harmful stereotypes. 12. Spencer Tracy. Spencer Tracy is one of Hollywood's most respected actors to have graced the stages of its golden age. He became a household name through such films as Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Judgment at Nuremberg, and Captain Courageous. His on-screen charisma, coupled with a talent for portraying deep characters, has made him more than just a favorite, but also an icon. Not everything about Tracy's career, however, is without its controversy. Some of his movies made during the early years of Hollywood reinforced racial stereotypes prevalent during that time. A few films he acted in contained depictions of races with such stereotypes that reflected the prevalent views of the era, negative or overly simplistic ones. Tracy himself did little to speak out about these issues, but critics in this modern age have certainly spoken to his involvement in those productions. It is worth noting that Tracy also worked on more progressive films later in his career, such as Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, addressing issues of interracial marriage. However, his earlier collaborations only show how even the greatest actors were part of a system that often looked beyond the harmful impact of racial stereotyping. 13. Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor is a name that is almost identical to Hollywood royalty. Staring with her striking beauty and giving unforgettable performances, she was excellent in the classics, like Cleopatra, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, or Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? Taylor earned 2 Academy Awards and was a trendsetter, admired both for her style and passionate spirit. Far from the screen, she was also a strong activist for AIDS awareness and became one of the first few celebrities in public service. However, like most stars of her generation, Taylor's early career was not without its problematic moments. For example, some of her films, such as Ivanhoe and Cleopatra, perpetuated racial and cultural stereotypes typical of Golden Age Hollywood. In Cleopatra, for example, Taylor played the legendary Egyptian queen, a role that many today feel should have gone to an actress of Middle Eastern or North African descent. These casting practices reflected the era's disregard for authentic representation. 14. Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando is one of Hollywood's most iconic actors. He gained recognition through his powerful performance in the classics A Streetcar Named Desire, The Godfather, and On the Waterfront. Brando influenced the way actors approach the craft, with raw emotion and intense presence redefining what it meant to act on screen. Though later he became a strong civil rights and indigenous rights activist, early in his career and private life were filled with controversies. Some of his movie performances, especially in films such as The Tea House of the August Moon, cast him in roles of people belonging to different races, like an Asian, for which he wore makeup and used over-the-top dialects. This kind of casting, known by many as yellowface, was a common problem in Hollywood during Brando's time and perpetuated harmful stereotypes. Brando's behavior also faced criticism off-screen. Though he did voice out against injustice in his later years, there was a time when his actions and statements did not seem to go in line with the progressive causes he would later stand for. His shift to being an advocate for the marginalized was a huge one, but delayed. 15. Mae West. Mae West was a true Hollywood trailblazer, known for her wit, charm, and unapologetic confidence. She was a star in films like She Done Him Wrong and I'm No Angel, where she often played bold, seductive women who weren't afraid to break societal norms. Her quick one-liners and bold persona made her a symbol of female empowerment in an era when women were often relegated to supporting roles. In light of such instances, it was often West's films, with its many boundaries-defying explorations on gender, in stories, which tended toward racist stereotypes. The African-American characters in some films would mostly present servile or comedy caricatures of what would describe a stereotypical individual, which were a representation not fitting the period, albeit the era had been largely portrayed from similar understandings or concepts. What makes her legacy complicated is that West was, in many ways, ahead of her time. She was vocal about equality for women and a supporter of marginalized communities through her personal life. She would hire black performers for her stage shows and even faced backlash for casting black actors in roles that gave them more visibility. 16. Hattie McDaniel. Hattie McDaniel was the first African American to win an Oscar as an actress, portraying Mammy in Gone with the Wind. She always demonstrated great talent and charm and acted in more than 300 films throughout her career, although she was seldom mentioned in the credits. A trailblazer for blacks in the industry at a time when there were scarce roles for African American actors, McDaniel was one of the best film actresses of her era. But her career was not without controversy. Most of the roles she took, The Faithful Maid and The Comedy Servant, perpetuated negative stereotypes about blackness. While common in Hollywood's golden age, the work that she and her peers did contributed to racist attitudes. Even during her lifetime, and certainly after, some critics said McDaniel reinforced a system where black people were marginalized. Despite the critical attention, she defended her work, suggesting that she preferred to appear as a maid on screen for $700 per week rather than be an actual one for $7 per week. She maximized whatever opportunities she was given within the deeply divided industry and was paving the road for successive generations of African American actors. 17. Humphrey Bogart. Humphrey Bogart was one of the most iconic legends of Hollywood's golden age. With his smoky voice, tough guy charisma, and undeniable screen presence, Bogart became the face of some of the classic films made during that era, including Casablanca, The Maltese Falcon, and The Big Sleep. His performances epitomized the film noir genre, and he captivated audiences across the globe with his portrayals of complex, morally ambiguous characters. However, as a matter of fact, many other stars of his era did suffer controversy in their careers. The works of Bogart are an example of those movies that feature some racially offensive character depictions that mirror the mentality of Hollywood at that time. Movies like Sahara and The African Queen feature characters from different cultures that lean heavily on stereotypes to reflect those cultures. What makes the narrative of Bogart complex is the fact that behind the curtains, he was an opponent of racism. He spoke against civil rights and fought McCarthyism because he believed his colleagues, during the Red Scare era, were wrongly oppressed with their rights. In life, Bogart was a progressive figure compared to the scripts and movies sometimes he took, as were many other actors' lives who found it between their convictions and a career in show business. 18. Lauren Bacall. Lauren Bacall, with her sultry voice and captivating on-screen presence, was one of Hollywood's brightest stars during its golden age. She did some of the most memorable work in the classics To Have and Have Not, The Big Sleep, and Key Largo. Bacall became a personification of sophistication and wit. Her pairing on screen with Humphrey Bogart, whom she later married, is the stuff of Hollywood legends. Bacall was also a vocal political figure. She was a liberal figure politically and supported progressive causes, not afraid to speak out when it was unpopular to do so at a time when speaking out could risk a career. She was against McCarthyism and civil liberties, making her a rare and bold voice in the film industry. However, unlike most of her peers, the films starring Bacall were not innocent of controversies. Several films she appeared in had stereotypical portrayals of minorities, exemplifying the prejudices and institutional racism existing at that time. Despite not writing the scripts or directing the film, her contribution to such a project has since been criticized by many. On one hand, she was a representation of progressive thought and courage in an industry that is often dominated by conservative values. On the other hand, her films at times perpetuated harmful stereotypes that Hollywood continues to grapple with today. 19. Cary Grant. Many might argue that he is indeed Hollywood's most urbane actor, Cary Grant, dashingly handsome and having a tongue dark quickly enough at hand. Having been quite popular in great classic film fare like his Girl Friday, North by Northwest, and The Philadelphia Story, such suaveness in an actor also goes to have a style with him. And that sets Cary Grant beyond the generations to have made history as leading men. Like many of the stars from the golden age of Hollywood, he worked in an industry that was profoundly entrenched in racial stereotypes. Some of the films in which he starred featured problematic portrayals of non-white characters, reflecting the racial prejudices prevalent at the time. In several movies, black characters were either relegated to minor, subservient roles or played stereotypically, contributing to the harmful and limiting way Hollywood viewed minorities. Grant himself was a man who never expressed personal racism, but the sort of roles he took were emblematic of the times that produced them. It also needs to be said, however, that the era of Hollywood's golden age was not one in which the film industry could disavow the racist attitudes of their time. For an actor cast in leading roles, turning down or fighting such stereotypes would prove to be professionally and personally very perilous. Ironically, the story of Cary Grant does not reveal anything similar to his contemporaries. No one proved to utter discriminatory comments openly or identified with racist theories. Toward the latter part of his career, Cary Grant turned into a supporter of civil rights and progressive in personal thinking. However, some of the films from his catalog remain age-related failures as far as racial elements are concerned. While we celebrate his charm and talent, it's equally important to acknowledge the problematic aspects of his era and the films he was a part of. This is not an unusual legacy, however. Many stars of his time worked in an industry that often reinforced racist norms, even if they did not hold such views. Ultimately, Cary Grant's career reminds us that the Hollywood system was a product of its time, but also reflected the deeper societal issues that are still being addressed in the industry today. 20. Henry Fonda. Henry Fonda is remembered as one of Hollywood's most respected actors, known for his strong, steady presence and a career that spanned decades. With memorable performances in films like The Grapes of Wrath, 12 Angry Men, and The Oxbow Incident, Fonda became a symbol of the everyman, playing roles that were often thoughtful and principled. He gained much acclaim for the capability of portraying characters who stand up for justice, and his performances gave him a place among Hollywood's greats. But despite all this, Fonda's career was not free of controversy, especially when it came to race. In some films that he starred in, there were racial biases common in Hollywood during his time. Sometimes, Fonda's roles would be stereotypical, placing them in subservient or one-dimensional roles. This was a common trend within the film industry during the golden age of Hollywood, as racial representation was problematic. Fonda, like his peers, was caught in a system that relied heavily on these stereotypes. Even though he was progressive in other ways, advocating civil rights and speaking out against injustice, those were not the kinds of roles that would help him move up the career ladder. Hollywood at the time of these films reflected racial biases, and generally, actors such as Fonda had little to say over the scripts or roles given to them. Turning them down could cost them a career. What distinguishes Fonda is his change over time. Later in his career, he was recognized for his social issue films, and he was an outspoken advocate for civil rights, particularly during the 1960s. He may have been a progressive figure in his personal life, but his earlier career made it difficult to reconcile his personal beliefs with the realities of working in an industry that often perpetuated harmful racial stereotypes. Although Fonda was known to have been personally active in progressive causes, the movies he was in retain all the stains of a period when racial representation in Hollywood was badly wrong. His career is an expression of how even the most respected stars of his era